I do want to introduce Gil here and give you some context on him and why I think he's so critically important to listen to for all of us in this ecosystem. You know, all of us in especially in the high-tech ecosystem that want to deploy technology into enterprises, including the federal government, have to deal with a lot of controls and regulations and rules. That's just a fact of life. But lately, there's just been an increase in these rules. Some of them are like slowing us down significantly. We in OODA have tried to start new conversations in government about decontrol. How can we remove some of these controls and go faster? And it has been hard. But one person who's really lifted me up and given me hope is Gil, and you'll find out why here in just a second. He's really made a logical case for the fact that, yeah, we need to go faster. Humanity requires this across multiple domains. Sure, there's concerns and worries, but we're going to mitigate those risks and move fast. And it has really been helpful to me as I have conversations in government, because a lot of people in government, the good folks like you people here, want to go faster. You need it for your mission, and you want to do it safely. He's also an innovator who's been building in the quantum computing domain and coming up with new concepts like, can you use machine learning on a quantum computer? What would quantum TensorFlow look like? So he invented that. So he had deep experience as a physicist. Now he runs a team of scientists who are building a next generation compute architecture that I think holds significant promise to changing the way we do computing, displacing our digital world. So with that, Gil, please correct the record if I said anything wrong.
No, that's great.
And help us all accelerate.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. Really appreciate it. So really happy to be here. As Bob mentioned, I've worked on all sorts of technologies. I'm going to try to weave a narrative through all three and explain to you sort of the OODA loops that have underpinned my whole life trajectory and how I came to working on these technologies, and obviously tell you more about these technologies from what I consider human software, so cultural engineering with EAC, and hardware and software with Extropic. So ever since I was a kid, I wanted to bridge science and science fiction, as one does, wanted to make sure that civilization could scale to the stars and we'd create the brilliant, abundant future that we all dream of. So my goal, ever since I was a child, was to figure out how to scale civilization to the stars, right? Live in the sci-fi future we wanted. And for this, I essentially derived an OODA loop without even knowing about OODA loops at the time. And so my first phase was going to be learning the laws of the universe, trying to understand physics, understand what are the rules of the world we live in. Phase two is orienting myself, identifying key technologies that are physics-based, so finding sort of exploits in the laws of physics to have groundbreaking technologies. And then phase three is taking action and building and scaling these technologies. And so I'm going to go through two cycles of this in this talk. So originally, my perception phase was to become a physicist. So I ended up on a career path to become a theoretical physicist. I was a cosmologist at first. I wanted to know the limits of the very big. But then as it turns out, the very big is ruled by fluctuations of the universe that are very small. So the quantum mechanical scale. That's what got me into quantum information. I was a quantum cosmologist. Over time, I realized that to understand the quantum mechanical world, we were going to have to build quantum mechanical computers. And so originally was working on the very big and the very small, and I kind of missed out on the middle, which I'll come back to later. The problem with trying to understand quantum matter and trying to unify quantum gravity is that nature is irreducible. You can't reduce nature to a few equations with a few parameters. It's highly complex, and so I had a sort of crisis of faith that I'd figure out a way to understand physics to create new technologies. And so, as one does when they're lost, they seek out a new path. I walked from the theoretical physics building at Perimeter to the quantum computing building at Waterloo. And there I learned to actually embrace complexity and figured out that we need to fight fire with fire. And so at the time I was studying black hole physics, and we were trying to have this quantum gravitational system and really understand it. And the cutting edge models were these so-called tensor networks, which are networks of quantum information that are representations of these systems, very similar to a deep learning architecture, and these have parameters that are learnable. So in a sense, we're trying to understand a highly complex natural system with a synthetic complex system that is parametric in software, right? So we're trying to mimic natural complex systems with artificial complex systems. In the same building, so now going from theoretical physics building to quantum computing building, we had these natural complex systems of quantum mechanical systems, and then we had these highly controlled quantum computers or proto-quantum computers, which have learnable parameters or tunable parameters of the physics. And so my big insight was to try to bridge this gap between sort of learnable representations and controllable physics. So essentially physics-based intelligence, so that includes physics-based computing, which I just described, right? So embedding algorithms into controllable physics. So viewing physics as programmable. We'll get to that in a second. And as a dual to that, taking inspiration from physics for our algorithms and our AI representations. So you have this sort of symbiotic duality between AI and physics, and this has been sort of the theme of my whole career through quantum and now thermocomputing, which I'll get to. So you could see, my big insight was to see physics itself as similar to a deep learning program. So in deep learning, you have these neural networks, there's a flow of information through it, they have these learnable parameters, these weights, these synapses that you train in order to fit your data or you optimize it for some goal. Similarly, if you have a controllable physical system, you have these tunable parameters and you can view it as sort of sheet music over time. You can play different notes, right, over time, so different values of the parameters that could be pumping different frequencies of laser or microwave controls into a system. And because you have these controllable parameters, you could train them very similarly to a neural network. So you can use gradient descent, and essentially it's a differentiable program, which is a deep learning program. And so basically invented and brought the first AI programs to quantum computers. I was the first user of Rigetti as a kid in school, and along with my now CTO Trevor, while we were at Waterloo, we ended up pioneering a software approach that got us poached by Google and then later became known as TensorFlow Quantum, which is essentially what I just described, programming quantum evolutions to do quantum forms of machine learning. But broadly, this goes beyond just quantum. This is a general paradigm of physics, time-controllable physics, that you could view as AI software. So we can program physics of the world. We could program artificial controlled complex systems to understand natural complex systems, right? And so we're fighting complexity with complexity. We're fighting fire with fire. And I think, my whole thesis is that this is the future of artificial intelligence. So as mentioned, I worked on quantum computing, ended up working at Google Quantum. And then over time, I realized we need some quantum mechanical data to feed these representations. And so I had to solve communication and sensing. And so I ended up joining a team founded by Sergey Brin to work on kind of full spectrum quantum technologies, including doing some business with the public sector because we're concerned with competitiveness with China across all three sectors. So if you want to know anything about quantum sensing, communication, and computing, I was definitely, my advice has made it to leaders of Alphabet and by proxy to the White House in the past. Over time, I realized that quantum technologies had a very long road ahead. They're very high-risk technologies, and it's not clear if the juice will be worth the squeeze. And mainly, it's because quantum computers suffer from noise from the environment that we have to constantly filter. And the achievements that we're trying to that the companies are trying to unlock now is quantum error correction, which is a form of pumping out noise, pumping out of entropy. You could think of it as an algorithmic form of cooling. And so instead of trying to build a computer that we have to go through all this trouble to create this perfect quantum state that's at zero temperature, I thought, what if we let some noise in and actually use the noise as an asset rather than liability? And we'll get to that in a second. But why are we pursuing physics-based computing and physics-based AI technologies in general? Well, we want to augment our perception capabilities. For example, quantum sensors can sense gravity and gravitational waves. We want to be able to augment our prediction abilities, so actually predicting small molecular dynamics, you actually need quantum mechanical models of it. And right now, it's very difficult to have these models in simulators. And we can have extremely precise control, right? You could think of what we're building in quantum computers is like quantum robotics, right? It's control at a quantum mechanical level. What could that lead to? It could lead to molecular assembly, sort of manual chemistry, and sort of more manual nuclear reactions at some point if we have the right sources and the right models, right? And so eventually it's sort of bringing cybernetic loops to the quantum scale, right? That was my whole goal with the quantum path. But as mentioned, I saw that quantum computing wasn't going to take care of the AI boom. So I was seeing AI compute demand kept scaling, and internally at Google, it was eating most of the workloads. Moore's law, as we knew it, is dead, and some people are just proposing nuclear reactors, but that wasn't a way forward. So let's dive in here in a bit more detail. Why has AI scaled so crazily? Well, we have these scaling laws, right? These laws that if you put more compute, put more power behind a model, throw more data at it, it's going to be more performant, right? And that's how these big players like OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on have been able to raise billions of dollars, is because they have a very accurate predictive model of how much performance they're going to get. And so it seems to be that the market has infinite appetite for more intelligence. And that's shown by the fact that models have just scaled at a crazy exponential rate that is much faster than Moore's law. Effectively the energy requirements to train these models has been growing exponentially, which in terms of CO2 equivalent is massive. So obviously in terms of energy and environmental policy, this has a big impact. And so now what hyperscalers are resorting to is proposing nuclear reactors or even investing in nuclear fusion companies, which we should do anyways. That's great, but that's not the end game solution. Could we just make compute more energy efficient? Can't NVIDIA figure this out, or Intel? No. Well, Moore's law is dead and has been dead for a while because deterministic digital computing is hitting a wall. And this wall is due to the fact that as you try to scale down transistors, they become unreliable. They become stochastic. They fire only sometimes. Why is that? Well, you're down to very few atoms, and they're all jiggling about. So whether or not your electrons cross the transistor, it's kind of a gamble, right? And by 2030 or so, this is going to become really a problem because we're not going to be able to keep scaling even with whatever FinFET technology you cook up. And so really what we have to do is build beyond Moore's law and figure out how to use stochasticity that is inherent in nature. Stochasticity just means randomness, the jiggly physics, how to harness that for the future of computing for AI. And so when I realized this, I went back to the drawing board, went back to understanding the physics of the world. What did I miss? What I missed was the physics of the mesoscale, the middle, the meat of the scale sandwich of physics, right? So the physics of everything between quantum and cosmos, right? The physics of biology, proteins, but also thermodynamics applies at many scales, including civilizational scale. And so what are mesoscale adaptive complex systems? Well, you have proteins, you have our brains, so biology, and clearly one of the most efficient AI computers is governed by this type of physics. But you could also think of cultural systems, memes, markets, and cellular automata as like sort of very artificial or virtual such complex systems that are self-adaptive. And so I started seeing connections between the two as I was exploring the equations underlying all of these. Just to zoom in on the brain here, the brain is a mesoscale physics-based AI computer that's 100 million times more energy efficient than our GPUs, right? So if there is an opportunity to build a 100 million times better computer, and it's just hanging there and staring us right in the face as we all stare at each other using our brains, we should probably build it before any sort of adversary does, right? And so I felt a sense of urgency there, so I quit quantum computing to build in this area. And there's been a lot of neuromorphic computing in the past, right? Very obsessed with biomimicry, getting spiking neural nets. To me, that's like building a plane that flaps its wings. It doesn't make sense. You want to understand, if you're going to take inspiration from biology, you want to understand what physical principles has biology figured out and harness those principles directly with our artificial systems. So that's what we aim to build for a type of physics called out of equilibrium thermodynamics or stochastic thermodynamics, which again is between the classical, the large things that are deterministic, like a ball, a baseball, and before you get to single atoms that are in superpositions and complex values and have weird interference, you just have probability blobs. You could just think of, for us, it's more or less a mosh pit of electrons that sloshes around the circuit, and we model that, and we figure out how to program those population dynamics down to very low power levels. Yeah, I'll get back to this, but the principle that is most interesting in stochastic thermodynamics is that most of the theory that's been developed here is less than 20 years old, or ballpark 20 years old, and it describes how there's a evolutionary-like principle at the level of matter and every bit of information, which is a pretty crazy thing to think about. Essentially, matter is being post-selected for according to its configuration, whether it is good at capturing energy from the environment and using it strategically to capture more energy in the future, right? Like things that survive, persist, the theories that have been developed for this type of theory, for this type of physics, are mostly trying to explain abiogenesis. But here we are trying to use this for computing. Abiogenesis is like, how did life emerge from a soup of matter, and how do we have evolution on a faster timescale than just our genetics? So it's actually a theory that underlies evolution, but once you stare at it long enough, you could start thinking of how these equations can explain mimetic landscape, technological landscape, economies, and so on, which I'll get to in a second. But focusing on computing, so I wanted to identify key technologies inspired by this type of physics and take action. So I did so about 2.5 years ago. I started two things simultaneously. One I consider cultural software. I was trying to program culture at a microscopic level such that the emergent property of the system was a prosperous world in which we can live in, where civilization grows. That applies at the level of America and the world. And the other one is a computational paradigm, which we call thermodynamic computing, so thermo-AI, which we think is going to be the ultimate substrate for AI. So I'm going to get into computing, and then I'll see how much time I'll have for EAC. But let's get into Extropic. What are we building? We're building these thermodynamic computers. You could think of them as like parametric physical systems that are in a bath of bouncy balls. So here you have spring and mass system as a mechanical analogy. And depending on the mass of the springs, the masses of the balls and the constants of the springs, you get a different distribution depending on those parameters. You could think of it as creating a potential energy landscape, so a bowl. And in this bowl, I drop a bunch of bouncy balls and I shake the bowl. And then the bouncy balls will accumulate in the valleys, right? And by shaping the shape of these valleys, I can get a different distribution at the output. Machine learning is about shaping distributions to match data, right? That's fundamentally what GenAI is. So if we can have a computer where we have these controllable parameters, and we keep tuning these parameters until the output of our computer matches our data distribution. We just did machine learning as a physical process. And we did so very energy efficiently and very fast with a small footprint, right? And so that's what we do. We contrast the dreams of the machine or the hallucinations and reality, and we do gradient-based update rules to make the two converge. So we could do this at a component level. We could do this at a multi-component level. In general, we think, this is a more technical slide, but we think that the future of machine learning is more probabilistic. Machine learning right now with deep learning struggles to capture complexity because it's stuck using models that fit on today's computers, which are mostly these Gaussian blobs that are single mode and don't capture tail effects. So by having a computer that's natively probabilistic, that we can compute in memory and compound complexity as we do transformations, we're going to be able to be far more data efficient and get more nines of fidelity and be able to generalize better and predict tail events. There's very fundamental reasons for this due to Bayesian theory if you're technical. But what do these computers actually look like? They're not masses and springs. Our very first prototype was a superconducting prototype because we came from quantum computing and it was very natural. And so we built this prototype. We predicted, if you built a transformer architecture out of these components, so we had to invent how to do current day deep learning as physics in these superconductors, what sort of energy efficiency gains could you get? You could get over 100 million times better in energy efficiency were you to scale the computer. The problem is, this technology in particular is, cryogenics. So you have to cool it. So we were using quantum computing infrastructure. It can run about 100 times hotter than a quantum computer, but it's still too much overhead, and it's not scalable. And so we're gonna open source that to the academic community. We wanted to solve mass scale manufacturing of these chips, and we wanted to solve how to use less sophisticated process nodes that are not dependent on Taiwan to have the most advanced AI chips. And over the past year and a half, we figured out how to do thermodynamic computing at room temperature in silicon with mass scale manufacturable processes. The sort of energy efficiency gains you can expect are about 1,000x energy efficiency gains for Monte Carlo algorithms. We think we're going to push this to 10,000x over the next year with different processes. You have some pretty massive speed-ups, about 1,000 times more bit flips per second for Monte Carlo compared to FPGA, which is thus a million times better than a CPU. So for any sort of probabilistic decision-making, financial simulations, wargaming, you want to use this computer. And this is not a technology we're promising in like 10 years or like quantum computing. We literally taped it out 3 weeks ago with TSMC, and we're shipping more chips at a very fast cadence, and we're going to be scaling our chips over the next year or two. So this is not something you can ignore. It is coming. We are very determined. We are sufficiently capitalized to execute on this. Of course, we can accelerate with more capital and more partners. But this is very much coming. This could be very disruptive, and this is why I wanted to be here to give everyone a heads up that a new form of computing is coming. On the cultural side, which sounds kind of trivial given the seriousness of making AI chips that are orders of magnitude more energy efficient. But during my time at Alphabet, I realized how important culture is, and culture is upstream of policy, the governmental level, and corporate level, and it steers where the capital goes and thus which technologies get produced. And having felt the effects of how cultural drift can affect which technologies you can work on in a corporation, I decided to work on shaping the cultural landscape so that everyone is optimistic about the future and wants to build the technologies that America and its allies need. And so I have a whole theory of, foundational theory of how to inspire oneself from physics. I'm going to go through it very quickly. I don't know how much time I have left. But essentially, again, it's out of equilibrium thermodynamics inspired. So essentially, this theory of thermodynamics can be applied at multiple scales, from matter to bits of information, bits of culture and memes and information such as what sort of design should I have for this piece of technology? How should I govern my company? Essentially, there's a selective pressure on ways to organize matter in general, and essentially it drives not only life itself but our markets and civilization. And to us, as part of this movement, we call it the human techno-capital mimetic machine, right? So these things are all co-evolving with one another, and by changing any one of them, the capital flow, a certain technology, a certain piece of culture, or human genetics, then it affects the others, right? And so just seeing it as a coupled, complex, self-adaptive system was a different way to see things. And so because all of these co-evolve together, what is a higher leverage thing I could do to increase the scope and scale of civilization than just focusing on a technology and building a company? It's to change the culture so thousands of companies are produced. And over 2.5 years, grown the movement to nearly 1 billion views this year. It's affected policy of big players such as OpenAI, Meta, xAI, and it's really some of our prescriptions have been the basis for some of the Republican platform when it comes to open source AI. So it's had quite the impact. Worked with Mark Andreessen on his techno-optimism essay, which is a variant of our framework. essentially what we push for as the golden metric to measure progress is the Kardashev scale. So how much free energy are we producing and consuming productively? Because it is it is prescribed by the laws of physics. Systems that are better at dissipating free energy survive and are selected for, period. So either America and our subculture adapts in order to maximize growth, or we slowly fade, right? But it also, because this is OODAcon, it also makes you think about vectors for unrestricted warfare, where maybe convincing a population to degrow is a way to essentially dissipate your enemy without firing a single bullet. And so, part of what I've been doing has been fighting psychological operations, which we call, deceleration measures or decels, online through what I call mimetic warfare, which is basically me just tweeting angrily on my phone. Building an army of followers to do so, because I think, if we're culturally compromised, it's kind of like fighting an enemy that's everywhere, and we got to fight fire with fire. So just like how we were being attacked by adversarial engineering of our adaptive complex systems, because I had complex systems understanding, I wanted to fight fire with fire and use the control parameters of the complex system that is our culture to fight this. I'm going to skip through some slides, but essentially what we argue for is variance and exploration, so maintaining a culture of innovation and not forcing things into one way of doing things, because variance allows you to discover new ways of doing things, which is important as we constantly optimize to maximize our growth. In terms of how should we govern things, well, the optimal thing is to have the optimal cybernetic hierarchy is to have a physical hierarchy, so just like the internet, a network. This could be a corporate hierarchy. We already have this in the United States. We have a beautiful system that's hierarchical. But in general, as you go up the hierarchy, you want nested cybernetic loops on longer timescales, and you want less bits of control. So we don't want to over-concentrate power at the top of the hierarchy, because that is not fault-tolerant to single nodes becoming corrupt, right? So if you have a authoritarian dictator and they become corrupt, then the whole system fails, right? And so it's been really thinking from a physics-first view, how do we govern ourselves? How do we control systems in a way that's robust to adversarial perturbations and corruption, so that we fault-tolerantly keep climbing the Kardashev scale? And so, the TLDR is, we argue for a culture of optimism, a freedom of exploration. We maximize growth through technological and cultural engineering. By sharing knowledge and collaborating, we can accelerate much faster. And decentralizing control gives us robustness, especially to adversarial perturbations, potentially from adversaries. But overall, how does this all fit together? It goes back to my original mission of scaling intelligence throughout the universe. With EAC and cultural engineering, we're scaling watts per civilization. And with Extropic and thermodynamic computing, we're scaling intelligence per watt. If you cancel out the watts, we have far more intelligence for our civilization, which hopefully will get us the Kardashev scale. Thank you very much. Yeah.